Well, my presentation is going to be about 2 or 3 subjects. One of them, of course, is our company, the way we're doing. It is not really a scientific presentation like the one we just had on medicine. In my presentation, there is not so much theory. I would like to tell you about the phase that we're in now. We harness the background science that we have at hand and try to make the best of it. Now, one thing is important for us, that is sustainability. I will mention that word a few times in my presentation, and I will also speak about the competition. We have a lot of competitors. Our company is fairly small, and the competitors, if they are really competitors of small companies like BASF or Bayer and places like that. But what are we talking about? What is it that we're talking about in our company? Well, there are certain bottlenecks in terms of supply when we're talking about natural products. Well, that's why I call it solving the supply chain issues of nature. And we, the consumers, we want certain materials, ingredients, active agents, and if possible, it should be completely natural. And we always find ingredients in nature that may help us to become older in life, to slow down cell degradation. And all of these ingredients, all of these agents are not really abounding in nature. And there are limited ways of manufacturing them, either by planting those plants and harvest that. For stevia, pure circle, they do that. That's not so successful if you look at it. The ecological balance, they use huge plantations for that. And the other method, of course, is the chemical synthesis. Many of these materials are being manufactured. Bivalene is one of the most common examples. The Bivalene market is thousands of metric tons per year. And if you look at what the natural output of it is, or the natural part of it, the part that is actually produced by nature, it's really only a bucket in the ocean. So what we can buy reminds us of what actually is in a plant, but it's only a faint memory when you buy the product, because most of it is actually artificially manufactured. Sometimes chemistry helps out, but the quality of the product, of course, is not as good as if it were purely natural. Now, we think that the most sustainable part, of course, is what you have available in nature. And that is when you manufacture ingredients through the process of fermentation. So you have some of the ingredients that have so-called supply bottlenecks in the world, where we would have more demand if we had larger quantities of these materials available. So there's stevia. We mentioned that already. It's one of these sugar substitutes that give us a few positive headlines, but Some of the other things that you see here, you're familiar with too. But fermentation, of course, that's something that has been around for a long, long time. And nowadays, fermentation is being used, but for slightly more simple products. And the chemical composition is rather complex, and therefore it's difficult to do. Okay, maybe I will tell you a bit about the company itself. Like I said, we've been around since 2005. I still call our company a startup, even though we have now all put on some gray hair after 13, 14 years. We're not, that young anymore. But we haven't really reached the point of being really, really profitable. That's why I call ourselves a startup. But we're in Basel, in Switzerland, which of course is an advantage because we can recruit staff from different places. We have 80. We were a little bit bigger before. We focused it now and reduced our size by 50%. And we're now focused on R&D. And so we were at 70, and now we're hiring again. So most of them are actually working in R&D. We want to stick to that. Innovation is going to be our strength. That's one of the initiators. Look at who we work with. It's quite a few well-known companies. So we are in flavors and fragrances. That's one of the sectors that we're in. Sweeteners, we already mentioned, of course, stevia. And then we're in health and wellness and in pest control. And with nootkatone, yes, we are in pest control. And we're applying for a permit for the United States. Yeah, our business model is B2B. We don't sell to the individual client. It's very complicated to manufacture the powder. That's why we only work with companies. IFF, Shibuda, BASF. They do basically the same. So in terms of the supply chain, raw material, consumer, we are basically at the second level from the bottom. Technology, I already mentioned. What could be interesting here is something that we should focus on. There's hardly a company which has so many different products on the basis of fermentation. 5 in total, actually. 2 of them we're in a strategic alliance with. We have a partnership with IFF and with Cargill for EverSweet. And that should be a situation that is profitable and beneficial for both of our companies. Now, what are our competitors when we're at the second lowest level of the value chain? Then those products that we get from the chemical process. I mean, they are our competition, competitive products. That's why companies like DSM, BASF, of course, they are our toughest competitors. However, we believe that we can still remain independent. We believe that we can be autonomous, and if you look at these larger companies, they're having a hard time, morphing into biotech companies. And if you understand chemistry, then it's not biology anymore. And fermentation is either working with colibacteria, and we do it with yeast. And yeast is a living organism. It's a cell. You have to be able to control it. I mean, chemistry is a lot easier than that. I mean, there you have your box and you know exactly which product to take, and you take it out of the drawer and have your different components. But with a yeast cell, it's not quite like that. And the chemistry people don't really like that so much when you may have different outcomes each time. Now, our strategy builds on our core capabilities. We have our strengths that we use, and we have everything that we basically need. We have 150 IP families registered, and of those we have now brought 5 products to market. So not all of these products are developed to the same extent, but some of them can be still called ready to go to market. And I think next year we will be in an even more profitable situation there. There's a number of companies that are not as far as we are. They're pure R&D companies, and they have a hard time with production and commercialization. And that's where we are talking to them. If we take it over or we optimize it, we want to use scalability for their products. Our value creation is based on 2 main aspects. One is innovation. Of course, that's the background of our company per se. We have specialized ingredients that through fermentation we can develop, and there's still a lot to be done. And we do have partnerships with bigger companies where we are basically service providers and have a service contract. So we want to be a commercial company, which we are, but we're still at a very early stage. So we do sell our own products, and these products we want to place in a profitable fashion in the market, and usually with a partner. Now, the partnerships that we have, half of them are active partnerships, more than half, 2/3, I should say, where we actually have joint projects. And the reason why they keep coming back is that we have seen in those that are in R&D, they're doing better when they have a partner that helps them to commercialize products. And that's good, and it shows that this step towards the chemical industry, where we all are, moving to biotechnological companies is not an easy option, and they haven't all done it. Now, concept phase to market, that is one of our strengths. So from a white piece of paper, we draw up a concept and then have a marketable product which we can position properly. And you see how long it takes. The main reason why it takes such a long time is that you start with a proof of concept. And, with these yeast cells, you want to develop a certain type of product, make it producible, and then you have provided it's in 50 milligrams per liter, which of course is very little very small output, and it's not viable economically. So that takes a while, and with us too, it took 14 years minus 2 or 3 since we have been dealing with these products. But in order to be able to do all of that, I think we're also rather unique. It's shown here at the bottom. For that, you need these different organizational units for R&D. So it's not only the yeast stem that is being developed, but they also have certain similarities in the fermentation process and they're scalable 200,000 liters. And it's a challenge, of course, because when you have a 2-liter bottle and you manage to do a fermentation there, it is different than in a tank of 200,000 liters. And it also refers to temperature, to pressure, and there are quite a few aspects you have to heed to make sure that it works. And with all products, the broth that you get out of the fermentation needs to be prepared, and then you process that so that it looks beautiful, white, that it has certain properties, so that and only then are you able to sell it. Now, these things here, we all have under one roof, which is pretty unique in the field. And with other things, it's very similar. We need to, of course, also look out for the regulatory rules to be able to market the products properly. So let me talk a bit about the technology, and then I start off with a small film, I think, that shows very neatly what our business is about. That doesn't seem to be working now. Yeah, it's a bit difficult with so many different systems. Okay, let's not do the film then. It was about non-GMO, but I can also explain that, of course. Oh, but now apparently it's loading. You're doing it now? Aha, remote control. It is not working. Too bad. So, okay, it doesn't matter. Now, what is this about? The main value, or the host that we use, is the cell of the yeast, and we're talking about the baker's yeast, and they have a number of ingredients that they can produce, and some of them are fungi, and the other are fungi, and the other one are bacteria. Fungi, they grow very fast, which of course is ideal. Now, so the colibacteria cannot be used for any kind of ingredients because if you have that in your food or in your drink, that may cause irritation, even though the E. coli bacteria are basically dead and don't have any negative impact. But the yeast cell is a more agreeable host. So I will then continue with the baker's yeast cell, which we use for the production of those 5 products that I showed you earlier. So we take this yeast, it's a cell, and the cell is modified in such a way that we tell or teach the cell, what it is supposed to produce and what not. A yeast cell has a great range of products that it can actually produce itself. One of them is alcohol. Therefore, yeast is used for the fermentation of wine or also for beer. Well, that's not what we really want. As little alcohol as possible, because we don't need it in the product. And it's a waste product and it's difficult for the manufacturer. We don't manufacture ourselves, so it's highly regulated when you have alcohol as an ingredient, and that is sometimes a bit of a problem, and those companies don't like to deal with it because, as it is highly regulated, it may have to be destroyed afterwards.
But basically, we're talking about these yeasts as our technology platform, metabolic engineering, and optimized vector yeast, and it's optimized, and that is the chemo. And we use certain genetics for this, certain genes, and so in order to produce certain, which as was originally produced by the original plant, this is the TMO part, and this is the production process, and only for that purpose. At the end, the product is gained without any chemotype parts, and the entire yeast cell is then used. There are no protein production involved. And let's now look at these yeast need sugar. There can be vitamins and minerals, and then it grows, and then it has sufficient energy in order to produce that which we have modified it to produce. Production takes place in these fermentation process and various components. We have this fermenter tanks. These are small scale in labs, up to 5 liters in largers. That is 300 liters capacity, and then at the contract manufacturers up to 200,000 liters, for example. The fermentation process usually takes anywhere between around about 7 days, and the yeast takes its time in order until it's ready, until it starts producing, and then obviously we want to get the maximum from it, which is within the cell before and we don't want the yeast cell to die because it's expensive to produce, and we use various processes in order to gain the crop and in order to get access to the product, and it's usually sometimes it's usually a powder, it might be darker or lighter, but in the end, and usually it's in powder form in the end of the weather type. This is the yeast cell in the form of sort of with a metro look, kind of like an underground map, and this shows you which this isn't the original. These has been coded where necessary, depending on who it belongs to. And you can see that the yeast cell can make the stevia, but it can also make other things like glucose, for example. And depending upon which part we take, so we can choose which metabolic processes we want and which we intend to foster, and there are other processes which also can be produced, and that is what we originally meant when we were preparing the yeast cell and using these genetic processes, and that's so other genes can be triggered and switch if we wish to go a different route. The thing here is, in principle, to use the metabolic processes available in nature, and then you combine that with genetic manipulations in order to get the product which we wish to have. And for example, this is a whole spectrum covered by the yeast cell. This is a brief selection of items one can produce with the yeast cell, and vanilla, for example, vanillin. Vanilla is obviously vanillin can be produced, which is a substitute for vanilla, and is a very, very near substitute for vanilla. The fermentation process, obviously we developed that, and then the scaling up. These are obviously key processes within the company. I say we start at different smaller scales, and 2 to 5 liters, as I said, and then depending upon what is necessary, we can then scale up to these various fermenters. We quite often have things produced in contract manufacturers with fermenter scales of up to 1,000, 2,000, and then ultimately when it's time for the actual production runs, we are up to 200,000 liters fermenters of a much larger scale, and so obviously they have appropriate, they can produce obviously different volumes. Downstream processing is extremely important, especially in terms of cost optimization obviously there's a 35 days which have to be covered. This was for the resveratrol. That was originally 37 days. That's been reduced to 5 days, and that obviously a lot of the shorter you can reduce the production times, obviously, the better the economics of the process. And this is obviously a lot of research and development work involved in that. And obviously, if you're all of the processes, you have to be fully in charge of all the processes involved. Otherwise, you will get the wrong result. This is some key facts about the yeast fermentation. Just a few interesting facts for you here. also if they are maybe appear obvious, but the manufacturing costs are obviously very important. These are a function of how long you have to work on the yeast strain, how long it takes to optimize it in order to get the fermentation process as short as possible, so that you can get the product you want, and so without any byproducts, etc. And obviously time is a factor and often a cost factor. And the on the one hand, we have the cost per liter or per time unit, how much can be produced per liter per time unit, for example. And there is a very good process can produce 100 grams per liter and time unit. That's a very good process. There are some products which go above that 100 grams per liter. Most are between 50 and 100 grams. And obviously the overall yield is relatively low. If it's around about 10% based on the input materials. And on the other hand, it's still better than the chemical processes which one could use as an alternative. The other reason why these huge fermentations are used, the bigger the fermentation is, obviously you get these scale effects, and if the mixing of all of these input materials does, of course, involve the smaller no matter how the big or small the time taken to mix them, and the time for the processing, the actual metabolism, that's the same. So the greater the volume, the more product you have. 200,000 liter tanks are the biggest tanks we have, and in which create a production efficiency of between 10 and 20 metric tons of raw materials. And in the case of our products, that is generally more like an annual production value. But if you there's some molecules which we intend to market where the market is only 8 or 90 metric tons in size, and if you can cover a large proportion of that because you have cheaper production costs, obviously you're involved in orders of scale of up to 1,600 metric tons, and then obviously some production workarounds are necessary in order to actually produce that. And obviously, when we're talking about scale here, obviously the facilities involved are much larger and involve appropriate investments. This is our look at our fields of activity. These are the market segments we are active in, the various products already marketed, and in the next 12 to 24 months, which we brought to the market within the next 1 to 2 years. And if you compare that to what we used to do in R&D, we used to have lots of other products we could have produced, but it's important for our customers that we look where they can actually have an application for these products. And obviously we don't need a huge number we can't be active in all market segments. Our strategy is basically that we are only offer compounds into the market where we know there is as shown by these fields here on this matrix on the slide. That's the only those are the only areas where we are actively involved. And this is a differentiation compared with our competition. I've already mentioned that a couple of times. We have major competitors, and 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 I said that I told you where we work and where we are in the value generation process. If you look at the market overall, you can see that we have to be active in those price areas where the market can cover our costs. And so we have to have this competitive pricing, but still, obviously, we like to choose the areas we like to work. We need to have this consistent product quality, but obviously, we can't obviously some but it's not the truth is also not all the products we make are actually to be seen on the list of ingredients on products which are available on the market for the people we work with. Our customers only can only use one of our products if the price helps there is an alternative to the ingredients they already use. There has to be this match between that which they currently use and that which we wish to substitute it with. Obviously, otherwise, there's no point for them in coming into business with us. The value chains have to be consistent. We need transparency there. We obviously they obviously the more efficient we can produce, the better we can be active in the market, and the development of these yeast strains does take the time, and I've already mentioned that already as well. The outlook for the company, we are these obviously the things the metrics are the same. Obviously, we need to have a good cash break even points. Obviously, key investors need, if we might need money, we still need to obviously to prepare to provide us support because we've got this far, and then and if we wish to break into larger markets, it wouldn't make any sense to stop our development if we're on the threshold of entering a larger market. So obviously, investors need to be prepared for that eventuality. Innovation is very important, obviously, because there are so many products which we can develop, and or seek out niches for our existing products, and so there are lots of areas where we still see commercial potential areas where, for example, we have not in the past decided to not spend the money on R&D, but that potential is there, and we could move back to that where if necessary, and then we would have entrance into new markets. Obviously, we have a well-developed product pipeline, and in this, so it's ultimately what we're looking at here is a new technology, ultimately innovation in itself. We have, as I said, we talk about the pipeline. We have quite an extensive product and market pipeline. This is an update here. You can see here new products which we intend to introduce into the market. Some things are already in the markets. You can see that on this slide as well. Some things here have not been in the market very long, and others. Another thing this slide shows you, for example, for resveratrol for human health, it's a 50, 60 megaton market, and so even if you have a high market share, there's not that much room for maneuver. Flavors and fragrances, market is 20 million, and that's for Valence and nootkatone. That's but as a potential to be rescheduled, and we are the beverages, for example, and in the vanillin, that's an area we see lots of potential. In the human health NC1, we have where we can see good profit margins with customers. There's a 9,000 metric ton market, and that's a good market, and we intend to be tapping that from next year onwards. And where other larger markets are available, it's taken the time to get into those major markets because we started fairly low. We need to get the process in place to have the right yeast strain, as I described. It can take a lot of R&D to get to where we've got to now. This is a look at the multiple avenues to broaden our value proposition, the market segments we're looking at. And one aspect here is to have the right ingredients and then open up market segments and look for areas where we need to understand applications better. Pest control, for example, to come up with the right formulations for that, working in cooperations and partnerships where we can for example, bed bugs, that's an area where we see offering potential. Mosquitoes and that is also, and ticks, that's something which is also growing, we think. Lice, and there are lots of, obviously these are pests which are vectors for human diseases, and we are looking to come up with formulations so that is designed to provide the most efficacy for the particular application field. And that is where we are building up ingredient systems, and as say, we are gradually focusing on specific applications, looking to get more depth in the market, to get more competitive with our competitors. And so you can imagine, we obviously can't have ingredients in Ubra. We need to have we can only offer a limited number of ingredients, and obviously we need to use them in the best possible way. So as a company, technology speaking, we can do a great deal. I showed you that the metro of the yeast, there are massive options there and opportunities there. We could produce a great many different products, but to make them viable in the market, that is obviously a different question. Getting economics of scale in place is obviously difficult in some cases. We're on the right path, I think, and I'm sure that we will be able to present lots of positive results in the future. Anyway, that's it from me. I'd like to thank you for listening. For an overview, obviously it hasn't been a very scientific approach, but it was to touch on various aspects of interest for value investors.